Welcome to My Therapist Is Out, an open space therapy collective podcast. We are your hub for queer and trans mental health care. Each episode, we talk with one of our open space therapists or LGBTQ community member about mental health and building community. I am your host, Renae Johnson, they, them. Founder of Open Space Therapy Collective, I'm a licensed therapist and an art therapist. I specialize in working with queer artists who are exploring their gender identity and recovering from complex trauma.
As we dive into today's topic, please keep in mind that this is a mental health podcast. We will talk about sensitive and difficult issues that are not appropriate for all audiences. Please take care while listening.
Hey y'all, this is a Swapcast episode. I am so excited, and this one is a really big deal for me on a lot of levels. We are swapcasting with the Mental Illness Happy Hour. Their host, Paul Gilmartin, is somebody that I have known over several years. We first met 8+ years ago when he generously offered to come and talk to clients that I was working with at a recovery center, which is just a really generous and positive experience. Right about that time, I was just starting to understand and get language for being a trans person, and that my gender didn't fit what was assigned to me. And Paul was one of the first people that I was able to really start talking to about that, and that's always held a special place for me. This episode, on top of being excited to reconnect with Paul, is a big one. I have stayed pretty private about my story over my lifetime because a lot of it has to do with my mom's story. My mom's mental health journey is a big part of my journey, and I wanted to respect her privacy and her process. And since she passed last year, it seems like a good time to start talking about it, both to continue my own journey and to honor her really daring and brave and powerful process for herself. So we're going to dive in. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you connect. If anything resonates for you, please reach out. DM, email, you know how to find us. And if you want to listen to more of Paul's episodes, please do. Mental Illness Happy Hour you can find on all of the podcast streamers at Mental Illness Happy Hour. You can find him on Instagram at MentalPod. He has been doing this podcast for 11+ years, and it's still going strong. His compassion, realistic viewpoint, and dark sense of humor definitely makes it one of my favorites. Let's dive in.
I'm here with Renae Johnson. It's so good to reconnect with you.
You too. I'm so excited.
I met Renae. She was a listener years ago living in the Bay Area. And I think you sent me an email saying, if you're ever up here, I have a couple of recovery places I'd love to have you come speak at. And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And we hung out and just had a great time.
Yeah. It was such a shot in the dark for me because I had been listening to your podcast obsessively at that time and was like, I think you had a show coming up or something. I'm like,
we were doing live shows up there then.
I was like, well, screw it. I'm just going to send an email. He probably won't respond. But yeah, you came up twice and talked to the clients that I was working with, and they were just loved it. And you brought so much richness because they were so early in their recovery that it was really helpful to see somebody who is farther along and living their life and doing different things than what they're used to.
Yeah, it was very gratifying, and I also felt from them. I felt like that energy when even if you're the one who's a little bit further along, you still feel like an energy from them because it's just more people that are like you. Mm-hmm. Even though the gender may be different or their stories may be different, mm-hmm. You're still struggling with self-esteem and productivity mm-hmm. and all the other bullshit mm-hmm. that we beat ourselves up about.
Yeah.
So one of the several reasons I'm excited to sit down and talk to you. One is you moved down here, you're a therapist now, mm-hmm. and you're specializing in LGBTQ plus mm-hmm. Struggles, issues. What would
mm-hmm.
you call it?
It's always a hard thing to figure out what to call it because you don't want to call it issues or problems, because then it makes it sound like if you're queer, then that's inherently a problem.
Right.
But unfortunately, a lot of our lived experience has a lot of trauma attached to it because we're in the place where we're at. So yeah, about a year ago, myself and some other amazing therapists that I've known for a very long time opened up a practice that specializes in working with queer, trans, and BIPOC people. And it's been a year, and it's been really awesome. And I'm just completely moved by working with them, and also all the clients that have come through our doors, and really, really honoring us being vulnerable and watching their growth and their change. It's just been awesome.
I was sharing with Renae before we started recording is that you were the first person that ever said to me, and I guess we've been talking about trans issues maybe, and you were the first person that ever opened up to me and said, I don't identify as the gender that people see me as. And I was, it kind of caught me off guard because I had preconceived notions about what somebody looks like or sounds like that doesn't identify as their gender assigned at birth. Talk about that.
You know, it's interesting when you said that, because I had just started getting language for it. I have known that I've been different my entire life, but in the 80s, that language wasn't around, especially for being non-binary and gender fluid. Like, I don't fit into any kind of category. I don't hit either binaries, and I'm not really totally androgynous either, and that really throws people. And so it's been really beautiful in the last couple of years as more people are saying, like, you know, gender is a construct, and it's fake, and you can live fluidly between all of the identities that are made up in there to really be yourself. And so it was really, like, you know, 8 years ago or whenever this was, it was a really beautiful thing to be able to tell somebody who is a cis man, like, hey, I don't know you, but by the way, like, this gender doesn't fit me. And you were just like, oh, and I, like, ask questions and were very present, instead of what typically I would get then and continue to get is like, oh yeah, sure, or oh, it's a fad, or like, you don't look ... Right. And so it was a really beautiful experience for me too to have you just sit with that and be in that space.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Because I'm always so afraid that I'm handling something ignorantly and I can't see it. I suppose everybody does, but I think especially as a straight white guy, you know, we're kind of the stereotype of the person that doesn't get it and thinks they get it. And obviously now I know that how somebody presents themselves, whether they're feminine or masculine or whatever, it's doesn't necessarily mean anything about who they identify inside. What was the process like for you? What were the words that you began, maybe starting with childhood, that you began to say, that word feels right, that description feels right, or this doesn't feel right?
Yeah. It, you know, one of the things that I can remember early on, and my mom would get so mad, but not mad enough where she would scold me, she'd just kind of storm away, is she'd be like, Renae, that's not very ladylike, because I was doing something rambunctious. And my response to her was, well, I'm not a lady and I'm not like, which, you know, I was 5 or 8 or something. Right. But really pushing back on that of like, this, what are you doing? This thing that you're trying to put on me doesn't fit. That doesn't work. And even with like the chores that I have a younger brother, love him, he's wonderful, that were split up, was he had the boys' chores and I had the girls' chores. And all I wanted to do was go mow the lawn and do the bigger labor-y things, because that was more fun and more active. And I would be told, no, you can't do that. That's for boys. And it was always really confusing for me. But there wasn't the language yet. And in high school...
And did you feel anger?
A lot of confusion.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of like, you know, when you wear an outfit that's too small and like you're just like squirmy and it doesn't fit. Yeah. Really like that. Like, I don't understand what's happening. And there's a lot of other struggles in my childhood. My parents had a horrible marriage. My mother was very sick. My dad didn't handle it well.
Your mother was sick mentally or physically?
Mentally. Yeah, she had a psychotic break when I was in 2nd grade because she had a bunch of memories flood back of being molested when she was a child. And so and it was the 80s, so antipsychotics weren't a thing yet. And so it took a long time for her to find the right medication and find the right psychiatrist and get the help and get back on her feet and moving.
That must have scared the shit out of you.
Oh, it was horrible.
Can you, if you're comfortable describing it, can you describe what you remember?
It was really, I do want to give both my parents credit. They had very little awareness or resources, but they did try as much as they could. But it was really scary. She ended up being diagnosed with borderline and OCD and PTSD and had psychotic features. And so she would see, we were a very religious household, she would see Jesus, and Jesus was telling her to give her money away. Jesus was telling her to tackle me. Jesus was telling her to run around and get out of the house. It was just really confusing. And so it was a lot of that, or she was asleep on the couch for 3 weeks. And yeah, as a kid, you're just kind of confused on all of a sudden, for the first handful of years of my life, she was there and hanging out. And then all of a sudden was saying things that didn't make any sense and really aggressive. And
were you communicating with your dad about this, or were you just everybody to themselves?
My dad did a good job of saying, here's what's happening, in an age appropriate way.
And you were how old?
I was in second grade, so I think that makes you 7 or 8. I was the age that she was when she got molested, which is why the memories all came back. And they did a good job of trying to get her out of the house when things were really bad. But prior to this, she was a stay-at-home mom, and he was working and bringing the money home, and he really tried for a while. And then it just got overwhelming, and we were in a very tiny town in the middle of Iowa, and so there's not a lot of support. It's the 80s, there's not a lot of understanding what's happening, and so it was a lot of he's working long hours, and we're stuck at home with mom and trying to stay at school later and go to friends later and kind of get away from the scary parts of it.
And when you're a kid and you don't know anything about that, when you hear secondhand that somebody's mom is quote unquote crazy, it fucking terrifies you because you don't know what that means.
Yeah.
You just know that there's something unpredictable and to you unsafe.
Yeah, totally. And there was a lot of people that wouldn't talk to us. My dad is very much a performer. He likes to look nice and shiny. They like to look like a perfect family at the church. So there was a performance of going to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and he worked at a college, so going to the college events and putting on the we're great and happy and everything's fine face. And then she would crack and things would go sideways or people would see it, or she wouldn't be around. And
would it be obvious what people would see in public?
It's hard for me to say. I think even when she wasn't psychotic, things were really off. And I think if you spent any amount of time with her, you could really tell. But I was in grade school, so it's hard for me to know what the adults were seeing. I just knew that a lot of people kept us at an arm's distance. And then some of the other kids would be like, oh, my parents don't like your parents. Or, oh, you're one of those people. No, I'm not going to hang out with you, or I'm not going over to your house, or those little things that you kind of pick up in kid language where you're like, oh, I also didn't know that was different than anybody else's home life. Because the people I was around were all people who were very, very strict religious. So life was already kind of weird and very private. And so it took me a long time to kind of get clued into other people have a different reality than this.
Yeah. And kids especially don't have a sense of what is moderate and appropriate.
Absolutely.
And a lot of adults don't as well.
Yeah.
Myself included.
Yeah. I think at 40, I'm still trying to figure that out.
So you've got this context of you're growing up in this family where there's a lot of turmoil, chaos. confusion,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got confusion going on inside you
Mm-hmm.
about who you are, the words that you would use to describe yourself.
Yeah, it really came to a head once puberty hit. I am a very feminine figured person. And the religion that my parents ascribed to and being in the Midwest was, I went from like being able to go play kickball in the yard with all the neighborhood kids to I was automatically a slut. I was automatically shamed for everything. I was automatically
By
wrong. Parents, teachers, other
because
kids.
you were developed, or
Yeah,
what?
like there was just this very clear like fear, what I can say now, like a very clear fear of like the female body or an AFAB body that had so much moral judgment attached to it.
What was the word you used?
AFAB, assigned female at birth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That it got even more confusing. And during that time, I was also going through the very puritanical, don't have sex before marriage, to completely disassociate from your body. Your body is a sin. Everything you're doing is wrong. That things like, do I want to be Gwen Stefani or do I want to be on Gwen Stefani started to come up. And I, especially towards like the end of high school, I would say a lot of things or express a lot of things that now are not, I realize are very not appropriate, but a lot of, I'm a girl, but I'm a guy, or like, I'm one of the boys, and yeah, I've got boobs, but really I've got a dick. And really saying these things, not realizing what I was saying, but it was a continual like subconscious leak of how I was feeling. And it brought in a lot of shame, not necessarily because of the gender, I like hadn't even gotten that far yet, but really because of the religious demonization of the body I was born into.
Yeah, it's like doubly bad.
Yeah,
you're bad because you have the female body,
mm-hmm.
But then on top of it, because you are imagining that it's something else or wishing it were something
mm-hmm.
else.
Mm-hmm.
So what were you attracted to all genders back then? What were you feeling, and what did you think you should be feeling?
It took me until college or past college to realize that I was attracted to all genders. At the time, I thought they were just close girlfriends, or like they were really cool, or I really like them, or, oh, this is just a really special relationship. And I had like boyfriends in high school, but there was so much shame. I just dove deeper into the religious aspect of it and disassociated even more from anything I was feeling attraction-wise, anything I was feeling gender-wise. And I ended up going from a Baptist, very Baptist cult-like background and converted into Mormonism because I just needed to be good enough so God wouldn't keep making my life so hard.
Wow.
Yeah.
I never knew that about you.
Yeah, it was intense. And that was, it's looking back now, it's been a long time. I didn't have the language for trauma yet either. That wasn't being talked about yet. I knew things were bad and I knew they were different, but it was still, okay, something's wrong with me, so I need to continue to be better and be more strict and live more strictly, and then I'll be in a life situation that isn't so cruel. Mormonism was not the answer, and marrying a Mormon man was also not the answer. Yeah,
Spoiler.
Surprise. Yeah.
So then, what's the next phase of your evolution in terms of embracing who you are or denying who you are and the words around it?
So I was really lucky in I jumped around a bunch in college to different schools. Surprised trauma people have a hard time staying put. And during one of the schools that I went to, I had two really, really good friends, and Luke and Lars. And Lars was in the closet at the time, quickly came out the second we got out of college, is married to a wonderful woman. And when I finally was like, I need to get rid of all of this religious shit and just try and be a human and see who's in there. Both of them with open arms were like, yeah, come move up to Minneapolis and be with us and let's see what happens.
That must have felt amazing.
It was amazing. They're like, this is well over 20 years ago and they're still more of a savior to me than Jesus ever will be. And that space and those, like, that non-judgment and that silliness that they both have that's very playful really allowed me to try different things, but not in a way of like, I need to come out or I need to do this formal explanation of anything. It was just like, just be you and we'll roll with whatever
Today
happens.
I'll try a mustache.
Yeah, exactly. I think that girl is cute. We need to talk about what that means. They didn't need that. And they were there for whatever was happening.
Isn't it amazing how just somebody's vibe
Mm-hmm.
can affect us so much?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a subconscious message to, okay, lighten the fuck up.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean ignore the issue, but it's not all life or death. But
Yeah.
it feels like it when we feel like an outsider.
Oh, totally. Yeah, lighten the fuck up. I feel like they deserve to have some shirts.
Yeah.
With that printed across it.
I saw, my favorite shirt that I ever saw was, this guy had one that said, if you met my family, you'd understand.
That's pretty great.
That's a good one. But yeah, I have a friend in my support group. He's my mentor. And sometimes he'll just say, why don't you just lighten the fuck up and smile a little bit more? And it makes me laugh because oftentimes that's what I need.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's amazing how you can just get stuck in the digging loop and examining loop, and then all of a sudden you're just can't get out of it.
Yeah. So what next? So you meet these two people, you go up and you live with them or hang out with them in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And you're beginning to feel freer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing anything necessarily like, oh, I'm going to experiment with this. You're just living and having an open mind and trying not to assign judgment to choices.
Yeah, which that alone was the biggest change I've ever experienced. And I had ended up dating a few women while I was up there, was able to play a little bit more in not the stereotypical femme places. And it was really relieving. And it was nice to just be in that space for a while. Fast forward a bunch, it wasn't until maybe, 10 years after that, which would be about 10 years ago, right before we were meeting, I had moved to the Bay Area, and transness and non-binariness was really being talked about a lot more. And the ability to not just go from a born female and transition to a very strict male role. And it was a really relieving thing to have people start talking about it and have people start saying like, oh yeah, this is how I've also felt forever. And say like, you don't have to fit. Just because you don't fit in this place doesn't mean you have to fit in the other one either. You can have your identity be fluid if that's what feels right and that's what feels aligned.
Would that be like the idea of a continuum?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I don't really fit anywhere, which after the religious experience is a very comfortable place for me. But it really allows for a lot of examination of like, clothes don't have a gender. Like, we just assign that. And so thinking of how you're dressing yourself more as like the whole thing is drag, and what do you want to do with it today? And the whole life is art. And so just because you're identifying or your core self feels this way doesn't mean that on Halloween I have to stay that way. It doesn't mean that on I need to look a certain way when I'm going to work or going out with friends, or it's Tuesday or it's Wednesday. And you can really use your outward appearance as an artful expression. And that's not a comment on what box you're trying to squeeze into.
So much of society's pushback is thinking that it's about them. When they see somebody on the street that is, quote unquote odd, they think, oh, they're trying to throw it in our face. It never occurs to them that person, that might just be how they feel comfortable.
Yeah. And it's bizarre. Yeah, I was listening to the episode you did with Jesse, who was talking about non-binary and non-monogamy, and like the meeting that you went to, and you had a trans person come with you, and somebody screamed and left the meeting because it's just like, it has nothing. Where does that even come from? Like, that dude is just living his life, going to a meeting, trying to get his shit together, and somehow someone else has made it about them, and it has gotten really aggressive.
Extra sad that it's in a support group meeting.
It's such a mindfuck.
But we rallied around that trans man
Yeah.
that was there, and while he never came back, he knew that he was loved there, and that we had his back, and that we wanted him to come back. But I totally get why somebody would be like, nope, that building's not for me.
Yeah. But also, like, what a healing experience to have people come up in that meeting and be like, oh no, we want you here, fuck that guy. Like, those things have lasting impact, even if it was too much for him to go back to that meeting. That stuff really makes a difference. I had a friend who, when I had switched my pronouns to they, them, and I just kind of like text everybody, I was like, hey, this shouldn't be a surprise, blah.
By the way, I'm not even aware what pronouns I have used for you since you walked in the door, so apologies if I...
No worries.
Yes, I figured.
Yeah.
No worries.
We're here to talk about gender. I'm not going to worry about that. But it was, it's really sweet. He's like, oh, we need to talk on the phone right now. And was just very much like this, really affirming, and like, this makes so much sense to me. And like outlined different parts of our relationship and things that we've done together and how I move around the world. And it wasn't, he's a cis dude, and it wasn't any type of him making it about him. It was, hey, I love you. I'm trying to figure out how to meet you here. Oh, I get this. I see you. And it was such a powerful, beautiful thing that
you broke up.
No, he's gay. He's not interested in me at all. But no, that stuff that stays with you, and it's a small thing that he probably doesn't remember, but that 10-minute conversation will stay with me forever.
I mean, does anything feel better than somebody loving you, not despite the thing that causes you anxiety, but because that's a part of you?
Yeah.
That is an amazing feeling. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's so terrifying sometimes to reveal that side of yourself, that you're like, oh, this is, nobody will love me if they know, this about me or that about me.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be really scary. And it's also, by the time you get enough insight into where you are and who you are and what you want to do, then it's, okay, I got to tell people, hope they don't reject me, and deal with all their shit on top of it. Right. As we're talking, like, when I was in high school, I was very like anti-gay. And it had a lot to do with the environment I was brought up in, but it also had to do with like a lot of what I was repressing. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm always wondering how much shame is being enacted out on somebody else when these aggressive things are done, whether it's politically or personally. And it's really sad that we don't have a culture that celebrates that exploration, and just really continues to support the shame spiral that happens.
So how many years ago was it when you began adopting they, them?
I did the she, they thing for a while and just kind of like sneaky stuck it out there a little bit.
Meaning either or.
Either or. And, you know, living in the Bay Area, everybody's kind of on the gender bendy spectrum of some sort, so it didn't matter. And it wasn't really until I moved down here, and that is not the case down here, that I was like, oh, I need to actually make this a point. And so it's been 3 years since it's just fully transitioned over to they, them. And it's really has made no difference in my personal life, which is great because I have wonderful chosen family. But I think in building new community and in starting the therapy practice and in really saying like, no, this is who I am and this is where I fit. And I'm just going to label this so it's really clear from day one. It's also helped some of the trauma of childhood stuff because I feel really safe when I can hide because being seen meant getting hurt, and hiding behind a she, they pronoun was safe for a while, but then it turned into people projecting their own stuff, femme stuff on me that wasn't fitting.
How so?
Even there's so much gender bias. When I was working in nonprofits, it was really clear that the women in nonprofit got pushed to the caretaking and the lower paid roles and the dismissed, and the male identifying people were pushed up in leadership. And there was a huge difference between whose ideas were being respected and who was getting trained up and all of those things. And in the process of being like, I'm not buying into any of or either of those, it's been kind of fun to make people uncomfortable, especially when building a business as I'm working with coaches, or I hired Google Ads company and they're doing really bigoted stuff, and being like, no, you can't dismiss this because I'm a woman, and you can't hold this up higher than it is because I'm a man. You just have to kind of look at it and be really uncomfortable.
Still, if you want a promotion, go by DM. Just briefly. That's just a little tip. A little tip from me. You're not selling out your people. That's just about money. It's just business, like they say in The Godfather.
Absolutely.
That must have been incredibly frustrating and angering. But you also seem like somebody who kind of can take a chill pill sometimes and take the long view, or am I wrong?
No, totally. Having a mom who's been so sick for so long, you really kind of learn to shake off the bullshit and really be like, okay, does this matter? Does this not matter? Am I going to care in 72 hours or am I not? And so when somebody's doing something shady because of a gender projection, like, yeah, it sucks in the moment for a minute, but I'm not hanging on to that. That's like, I went for a walk down the LA River today, and I pulled my phone out to take a video of like how beautiful it was, and some guy on a bike rides by and like, you're so hot. I'm like, dude, fuck off. I'm just trying to take a video of a bird. But
now explain that to, I understand. Explain, and I wouldn't have 15 years ago. I'd be like, why don't you want a compliment? And, I'm not going to unpack, all the shit that I needed to let go of and be educated about. And I'm sure I still need more education about it. But talk to somebody who's listening, probably a dude, who is like, she got a compliment.
That's not a compliment.
And explain that. Explain that.
It is, especially as somebody who's doesn't identify as a gender. One, you're saying, I see you as something you're not. And two, I am going to yell at you in public. Three, I'm going to let you know that not only do I see you as a gender that I'm not, but I also see you as something that I can touch and think about and dominate. And we don't ever even talk about like sexual trauma stuff in here, but you don't know who you're yelling this horrible statement to. Like, this dude has no idea what he's bringing up or triggering in me, which instantly I go into, like, get triggered and go into a childhood trauma space. And that's horrible. So he's feeling really good about himself, being like, you don't need to take a video, you're too hot. No, actually, you've just completely ruined my next 25 minutes as I try and get myself out of a trauma trigger space. Ugh.
Yeah. It's to somebody who doesn't understand it, I would, maybe a phrase that I would say is, they're not a car at a car show. Yell that about a car at a car show.
Totally.
But people are a little more complicated, and and they don't probably give a fuck what you think about them anyway. And I think also a lot of people, typically men, haven't had the lived experience of someone who is sexualized. Some men have, but not institutionally. And I think that piece, if society is going to kind of move forward, I think there needs to be a way for that to be communicated to the men who, probably aren't criminals, aren't beating their kids, or they're a nice enough person, but they're just ignorant.
Yeah, and I'm sure this person was too, just a normal dude in the world, and has been taught, and it's been normalized, like, this is a compliment, and that just continues to get reinforced. And so the more, I think, the more cis dudes that can be like, yo, dude, that's not cool, the better, because they're going to also dismiss anytime an AFAB person or a woman says, don't do that. Like, when I was living in New York, the catcalls were insane.
So it's not a stereotype.
Yeah.
I always assumed that was, I knew it existed, but I was just assumed that was a trope.
No, I wish. And there was a period where I'd yell back at them, and they would get mad. They would dismiss what I was saying. They'd tell me that I like it anyway. So it doesn't, even me saying don't do that gets dismissed, and then another boundary cross is happening. Another violation is happening. So it's not going to, that healing process for men is not going to come from somebody like me. It's going to come from you.
Well, I just burped. Let's talk about that. So let's talk about your work as a therapist. Did you consciously get into a therapy space where you want to help the queer community, the queer and trans community, or did it evolve into that?
I guess a little of both. When I was living in the Bay Area, it wasn't needed because everybody's some sort of gay. And moving down here, we had, my partner and I had actually in January 2020 moved to Singapore, and we're supposed to be living in Singapore for 2 years.
Renae was telling me about this before we started recording.
Yeah. And my partner was on a postdoc, and I thought I needed a break from the mental health world. I'd been working in nonprofits for 10 years. The system was exhausting, and I was going to take a break, and I wasn't sure if I was going to come back. We were there for 2 to 3 months, and then lockdown happened, and I was in a hot apartment for 6 months. But ended up coming to LA and being like, yeah, I really miss working with clients. I really miss that, like, very personal journey. I find it really powerful and purposeful and important. And so I started seeing clients private practice, and I filled up so fast because what people that came to see me was like, there are no queer or trans competent therapists out there. There are people that will say, there are therapists that will say, oh yeah, I'm like queer and trans friendly, no problem. But then I'll spend the 45-minute session educating them on what the queer and trans experience is like. And I don't need to pay a therapist to educate them. And so it was really clear that, one, this is my community, and two, there's a hole here. And so the therapists that I brought on are all part of the queer community, part of the BIPOC community.
What was the last word you said?
BIPOC. So I am myself a very transparent white person, but the other
person of color.
Yeah, person of color.
Okay.
But the other therapists, some of the other therapists that I work with, come from a bunch of different cultural backgrounds, because I can talk to the white queer and trans experience. I can't talk to the Black queer and trans experience. And that's also a really big need. And I think that is with any kind of therapy. The best therapists that you can work with are somebody who shares some level of your lived experience. I mean, I think that's a huge part of why 12-step programs are so good, is because there's a shared lived experience. So you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from a place of understanding.
Yeah, could not agree more. So what does the BI refer to in BI?
Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Okay. It must have been exciting when you realized what a need you were going to fill for people.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
No, it is. Something I've always wanted, and I'm kind of that person anyway, is like having a bunch of community around me. And I have amazing community in the Bay, great community here. And the bigger picture for us is to, yes, provide the individual therapy and the group therapy for this place, but also our hope is to expand and have a more community space where it can be a hub for people to land and people to hang out and make relationships and build connections with and build out bigger community.
So outside of the paid 45-minute.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying to figure out like what the next steps are. And so the maybe easiest entry is to having, like a coffee shop that also has like therapy offices in the back. You can spend your $2 to get a cup of coffee and then hang out there all day and meet people, and somebody can have a writing group, or it can be a stitch and bitch, or, whatever it is. But really have more than just the individual therapy, because while therapy is important, it's not going to work if you don't have a solid community around you.
Yeah, you gotta road test the car. You just you're reading the manual about. And yes, the experience with the therapist, can be a template for intimacy and transparency and non-judgment. Sure. But ultimately, you need to road test at other places. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're, something I say to the clients who come and see me, and the therapists that in our collective all say, is that there will be a point where you are bored of me and you are done with therapy. And that is my goal, is you don't need me anymore. Because any therapist who's like, you need to see me forever, there's just so much stuff, does not have your best interest in heart.
Yeah, especially if they say it creepy.
Like yeah, especially.
What are some of the common anxieties that your clients come in with? Or confusions?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it. So I work a lot with gender identity and identity development, and I work a lot with artists. And it's, a lot of people are coming in a place of like, my gender is not exactly what I was assigned with at birth, and I'm nervous to start talking about it. I'm nervous what it means to start living a little bit differently. I'm nervous if I'm going to get rejected by the people in my life. I'm nervous if I try something or shift my appearance or lifestyle or identity in a different way, and that doesn't fit, and I change something, that I'm going to get judged for it. And so a lot of people are coming in looking for a space to explore that. A lot of queer and trans people have a ton of trauma. And so also figuring out where the trauma ends and the self and the identity begin, and really pulling those things apart is a huge piece of it. And like, your identity is not a result of your trauma. There's been, I think, a really important thing is like, we may think our personality is hypervigilance and very type A and making sure that everybody around us is okay and happy. And it's like, no, those are actually trauma responses. And if we pull the need to do those away, where is your identity and who are you? And so really allowing to shed those things. So yes, your gender identity can shine, but also your full personality can too.
Do you ever get to a point with a client where you think to yourself, I think there's trauma that's nonverbal and this isn't going to be talked out. I need to suggest either additional therapy, a different modality. What have you?
Absolutely. So I am an art therapist, and so we'll use a lot of art therapy things when we hit those points. We have another art therapist in our practice. We also have a dance movement therapist in our practice. One of the other therapists is very somatic based, and so we have a lot of our practitioners are trained in things that aren't verbal, because there's so much more than that, and our body holds so much more than that, and our subconscious has a whole different story than our conscious mind does, and really getting to all of those different parts and letting all of that come to the table and all be respected is really important. And so whether it's through art making or through somatic work, or we have an EMDR specialist, like using a bunch of different modalities. And what I use isn't going to fit for everybody. And so it's also finding what fits for you. And if I hit something that I'm like, this is kind of beyond my skill set, I'll find somebody that I can be like, this other therapist is a badass that really can help you and help that transition process.
Do any particular success stories come to mind? Somebody that got the most that they could out of the therapeutic process, especially in terms of whether it's trauma or anything else, but particularly I think around gender being a part of the queer community.
Yes. I'm going to try and say this so I don't violate any HIPAA things.
Right.
There is somebody that I started working with when I first moved to LA about 3 years ago, who was a trans woman. She's incredible. She came to me for a relationship therapy that was in a very toxic relationship. And that relationship was mimicking patterns of her childhood trauma. And that included her cis woman partner projecting extra feminine, dainty identities on her. And so she was being over-feminized. Even as a trans woman, she was being over-feminized by her partner. And the client, and we'll still check in once a month or as she needs, is like a punk rock bitch. Like, she's like a big music head, very alt, great fashion sense, but isn't interested in like rainbows and puppies and cutes and curlies and all of those things. And so it was also in that place of, let's pull the trauma reenactment out of this dynamic. They ended up splitting up. And let's also say your identity as a woman doesn't have to be this pretty makeup cutesy thing. And she's now in a place where she was so people-pleasing and so afraid to let any part of herself out because she thought she was just going to destroy everybody, to having really great relationships. She's a non-monogamous person, so has 2 really great partners that she feels very like validated and supported by, and doesn't feel like she needs to people-please and caretake to get that love and acceptance. And that's huge. It's one of those things that I can only tell her that a little bit without it being boundary crossing or inappropriate.
Right. It felt like it was general enough that I'll ask you for her name and social security after we're done talking. As you were sharing that with me, the thought occurred to me, has there ever been anybody in therapy who a part of their success in being in there hasn't involved them identifying what they like? And not apologizing for it or crossing other people's boundaries, trying to get it. It seems like such a universal thing, at least for people pleasers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's huge. It's also, I think it goes for definitely for people pleasers, but also for people who don't know how to get that for themselves. So they cross other people's boundaries to try and get it externally from somebody else. And to be like, Paul, you can't give me what I need. So I'm going to be mad at you. And then I'm going to try and go get it from somebody else. It's like, no, I need to figure out what I need and be able to give that to myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard in one of my support groups, be the person you want to date before you get out there into the dating pool. Do you resemble at all what you're looking for? And
Absolutely.
if not, take some time alone and work on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And why? Like, why are you expecting somebody to have lower standards than you have? Because if you won't date you, why are you trying to date somebody who would date you?
Well, that's a deep one. Wow. Is that another t-shirt?
Evidently.
Would you date you?
I saw somebody with a tote the other day that's like, I go to therapy because you won't.
Anything else you want to share? Where can people get a hold of you? Because you do tele sessions, correct?
Yeah.
Or are you all full up now?
No, we just hired another therapist about a month ago. Okay. And so she's got a bunch of openings. And then a few of our other therapists have a couple openings. You can find us at openspacetherapycollective.com. We are on Instagram, TikTok. We started our own podcast called My Therapist Is Out, which is not as polished as yours, but we are trying. And so, yeah.
And is it therapist talking to therapists?
Yeah, it's our first dozen episodes or so are our therapists talking to each other, and we've really realized, like, wait, this is a great community building tool. So we're going to start talking with other queer artists and business owners and community builders this winter. So that'll be really, really fun and exciting.
Cool. And I think lay people would be interested in just hearing the way the therapists talk to each other.
Yeah.
How you talk about us behind our backs.
We were talking about doing a therapist after dark episode with therapist horror stories.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Did you do one like once a month or once a year? Oh, people would love. Yeah. I get them through the surveys.
Yeah.
But yeah, I imagine you guys, because you're sharing them from the opposite. We get them about the therapists who are horror stories, but we never get to hear the client.
I mean, but it's also, we don't have any clients that are horror stories. Even because it's a space where the client, like, maybe we'll get an asshole every once in a while, but that's like a 5-minute conversation. They don't stick around. What we get is on it, similar to your surveys is, oh, by the way, I was seeing this therapist who said they were queer informed, and a month in, they told me that they were here to pray the gay away.
Oh.
And so what they are, or like therapists that we'll like consult with. I just talked to a client that I see individually. I talked to their couples counselor who misgendered them the whole time. And I'm just, yeah. So now we'll probably just rag on other therapists.
Yeah. So give us the website one more time.
OpenSpaceTherapyCollective.com.
Open Space Therapy Collective, and Renae will give us all the links and stuff. I know people are going to try to get you as their therapist after listening to this. So I just wanted to say to them, keep your hopes low, because I imagine Renae's schedule is pretty packed. But one of the support group meetings that we do with people sometimes for the podcast is they were talking about how difficult it can be to find a therapist for our, whatever somebody's particular issue is, especially if it's really specific.
It's so hard. Yeah, I'm very picky. So everybody that works at our collective is an excellent therapist, and I fully back them. Which is, we've interviewed so many therapists, and there are very few really good therapists out there. And so I feel that struggle. But our crew is really solid. So if I'm not available, somebody else awesome will be.
Thanks, Renae.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Many, many Thanks. Is that, am I being redundant? I don't give a shit. That's a holiday spirit kicking in. What am I talking about? I do that pretty much every single episode.
Thanks for joining us. If you're in California and looking for a therapist, visit our website at openspacetherapycollective.com and book a free intro call with one of our therapists. If you're enjoying My Therapist Is Out, please rate, review, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. My Therapist Is Out is an open space therapy collective podcast. Our therapists are Renae Johnson, Kristen Crow, Debbie White, Jenny Nigro, and Tara Friedman. Our podcast editing is done by Smash and Grab Studio. We'd love to hear from you about today's topic, so you can email us at info@openspacetherapycollective.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at My Therapist Is Out and Open Space Therapy Collective. Thanks for listening.